So, every 10 years, the US Census gives us this big snapshot of who we are as a country. But the 2020 results, man, they weren't just a snapshot. They were a full-blown mystery novel, packed with twists and some absolutely shocking headlines. Today, we're going to get into that data and uncover the really surprising story of America's changing face.
Look, we all know the US is getting more diverse. That's not news. But the numbers that came back from the 2020 census suggested a change that was so big and so fast, it had experts just scratching their heads. So the big question we're digging into today is, what is really going on here?
First up, the number that kicked this whole thing off. For the very first time since the census started way back in 1790, the population of people identifying as white alone actually went down. And I don't just mean as a percentage of the total, the actual number of people dropped by 8.6%. I mean, that is a truly historic shift.
And then, at the exact same time, we saw this. The number of Americans who identify as multiracial didn't just grow, it absolutely exploded. It shot out by 276%. So how on earth can both of these things be true at the same time? How can one group shrink for the first time in history while another one just skyrockets like that? To figure it out, we've got to look a little closer at the data.
Okay, so let's put those two headline-grabbing numbers into perspective and take a look at the bigger picture from the 2020 census. So while the white-alone population took that dip, look at the multiracial population. It leaped from just 9 million people to almost 34 million. You can also see the Hispanic or Latino population grew by a huge 23%. But even with diversity clearly on the rise across the board, it's that 8.6% drop and that 276% jump that are the real head-scratchers here. They're the outliers that really need an explanation.
All right, to start cracking this case, we have to grapple with a surprisingly tricky question. Who is white in America? You see, how people with European heritage report their own identity, well, it's a lot more complicated than you might think.
In 2020, the big three European ancestries people reported were English, German, and Irish. No big surprise there. They make up a huge chunk of the white population. But here's where it gets really interesting. These labels, they're way more fluid than you'd imagine. How people answer this question can change like crazy from one census to the next.
Just get a load of this. Back in 1980, almost 22% of the whole country reported English ancestry. Fast forward to the year 2000, and that number completely cratered to under 9%. A big part of the reason is the rise of people reporting their ancestry as just American. As generations passed, people with deep roots here stopped identifying with a specific country over in Europe. It's a perfect illustration of how identity is a moving target.
So what is this American ancestry exactly? Well, it's a choice often made by people whose families have been in the US for so long that those original ethnic ties just feel really distant. It's basically a way of saying, my roots are here. This just goes to show that how the white population identifies itself is subjective and has been shifting for decades.
Okay, now let's jump to the other side of this puzzle, that absolutely incredible 276% increase. Where in the world did all these newly identified multiracial Americans come from? This is fascinating stuff. When you break down those 33.8 million multiracial Americans, one single category just completely dwarfs all the others. More than half of them, 19.3 million people, identified as white and some other race. This is where the vast, vast majority of that growth happened.
1,000%. Just let that sink in for a second. That's not just a demographic shift, that's a statistical earthquake. There is no way you can explain that kind of increase with birth rates or anything like it. Something else had to be going on. And this is the clue that unlocks the entire mystery.
And here it is, the big reveal. This story isn't just about how Americans see themselves, it's about how the Census Bureau decided to count them.
So, what changed? In 2020, the census introduced a totally new process. Before, it was pretty much all about the boxes people checked. But this new method used an algorithm to process the write-in answers. So if you checked one race box, say white, but then also wrote in a detailed origin like Mexican or Lebanese, this new algorithm could automatically recode your race for you. This was a fundamental change to the rules of the game. Researchers like Paul Starr and Christina Pao jumped all over this, calling it a statistical illusion. Their argument was that the new method was confusing a person's ancestry, where their family came from, with their racial identity, how they see themselves today. The system was essentially making its own assumption about who was multiracial, even if that person only checked one box.
Let's walk through a crystal clear example. A lot of Hispanic respondents identify their race as white. So in 2020, if someone checked the white box but then also wrote in Mexican as their origin, boom! The new algorithm automatically reclassified them as multiracial, specifically white and some other race. Now multiply that simple change by millions of people, and just like that, you've created a 1,000% increase.
And hey, this isn't just a theory. This chart shows what happened when the census applied these exact same new coding rules to its other surveys. The number of people identifying as Native and white with a write-in ancestry suddenly surged the very same year the new method was implemented. That's the statistical fingerprint of the change, the smoking gun.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Why does it matter? The key insight here is that census data doesn't just reflect reality, it actually helps shape it. The numbers tell a story about who we are, yeah, but that story is totally formed by the questions we ask and the methods we use. The 2020 census shows a country that is absolutely more diverse, for sure, but it also reveals just how complex and, frankly, messy the relationship is between how we see ourselves and how we get counted.
And that leaves us with a final, really powerful thought. If a simple change in an algorithm can cause a historic decline in one group and create what experts are calling a statistical illusion in another, it really forces us to ask, what do these numbers truly represent? It's a powerful reminder that behind every single statistic, there's a complex story of human identity,